40 years ago, it changed the arcade landscape. Today, Battlezone is still an innovator exploring the new frontier of VR. Here is why Battlezone's been such a big deal to generations of gamers and why it continues to be. Hello and welcome to the Rebellion Great Library, where arcade cabinets reach off farther than the eye can see, and you never get shushed for celebrating a new high score. We've been given express permission to be here today by the librarians, never look them directly in the eye by the way, because we're talking about Battlezone. Depending on your age, your gaming platforms of choice, and your preferred control method for blowing 7 bells out of futuristic tanks, the name Battlezone might conjure up an image of a few different games. Maybe those gorgeous green vectors of the original 1980 arcade game, or even PSVR's high-octane, full immersion futurism. To Rebellion co-founders Jason and Chris Kingsley, the original arcade game was a seminal moment in the medium that inspired them to start making games of their own. So it's not a massive stretch to say that we have these iconic tank battles to thank for later adventures from Mr. Carl Fairburn, Mr. Rogue Trooper, and Mr. Horde of salivating undead Nazis hell-bent on eating you. So, thanks tanks. Before we start up the YouTube DeLorean and transport you back to deepest, darkest 1980, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. If you do, you'll get new videos every week, from updates on our upcoming games to tips, tricks and more. Okay, start her up.
You're the boss.
Alright, we've made it back to the dawn of the 80s. Rubik's Cubes and Spandau Ballet LPs litter the floors of every home, and that home cost about 17 quid. Most importantly, a new entertainment medium is exploding in dark, gloriously grotty rooms with sticky floors called arcades. And Battlezone is the star of them. Battlezone's a simple concept. You're in a tank, and around you are enemy tanks and missiles that mean you harm. Destroy them before they destroy you, watch your score go up, increase social standing among like-minded arcade dwellers. There are a few reasons it drew so many crowds in 1980 though. First, remember that we're only a few years clear of Pong at this point, and suddenly here's a game that puts you in a 3D environment in first-person perspective. The use of vector graphics to create the sense of depth in a 3D space was groundbreaking at the time when most games still used 2D sprites against a static backdrop. There's a real artistry to the efficiency of those lines. It's all so clean, and sure, that exploding volcano on the horizon looks maybe a bit rudimentary by today's standards, but at the same time, seeing a detail like that for its own sake was absolutely wild. Rumours even began to circulate that you could eventually reach the volcano in your tank and drive into it if you just kept going towards it. This was a time before message boards and developer tweets, so rumours like this could just percolate. And since players at the time spent so much time looking at that volcano on the horizon as they moved about, dancing between imminent projectiles, they couldn't help but wonder. For its pioneering 3D space and non-stop action, and the volcano, Battlezone earned its place in the arcade pantheon. Phase 2 of Battlezone's remarkable life takes place in the 90s. I'm not going to do that bit about house prices and toy fads for another decade, but I will say that in the intervening years we grew so fond of arcade video games that we decided it would be pretty wonderful if we could play them in our homes without having to pour coins into a greedy machine's gullet. Personal computers and game consoles invaded our homes, occupying the spaces under our tellies and on top of our study desks, where previously there had only been, respectively, copies of the Radio Times and crisp, unused encyclopedias we bought off a man who came to the door once. And it's here where Battlezone reintroduces itself. In 1995, Battlezone 2000 was released for Atari's handheld Lynx platform, and if it sounds confusing that a game from 1995 featured the number 2000, well, remember this as years before annualized sports franchises, and for about 5 years before the turn of the millennium, everything had to end in 2000 because it was the coolest, most contemporary 4 characters possible. until January 1st, 2000, whereupon it instantly became the most horrendously dated suffix possible. As you can see, Battlezone 2000 didn't reinvent the formula, but merely brought it to your hands for convenience's sake, reminding everyone how great the original arcade game was 15 years earlier. And then in 1998, Battlezone was released. Bear with me. Although it shares the same name as the original and carries the official license, this was a huge step forward into 3D polygonal graphics and a much deeper strategic combat proposition. Since you can harvest biometal on the fly and use it to build an army around you in real time while you fight, it's actually a kind of shooter strategy hybrid. And speaking very broadly, some of the principles here are similar to MOBAs, which is very forward thinking for 1998. Then there's multiplayer, which is split into strategy, deathmatch, and sniper delineations, and offered different levels of that strategic layer. Given that we were still basically in awe of Doom multiplayer and the sight of another actual player in an online game at all at this point, this was ambitious stuff. In 2016, Rebellion released a lovingly restored version with shiny HD graphics called Battlezone 98 Redux, and it's available on Steam right now if you're interested. But back to the 90s. A year after Battlezone, a sequel was released, and honestly at this point you could be forgiven for thinking they called it Battlezone 95 out of sheer malice, but no. This one was called Battlezone 2 Combat Commander. Like its predecessor, Combat Commander continued down the relatively untrodden path of shooter RTS hybridism, while also continuing an alt history 1970s story that had actually become pretty detail-rich by this point. And remember, we're still in 1999. RTS games were everywhere, yes, but the ability to go inside them and do the shooting yourself in first person was pretty much unique. Modders were mucking about in Warcraft's level editor and making something called Aeon of Strife, which would become, just Dota. But Battlezone 2 Combat Commander was already on shop shelves, ask your nan what they are, by this point. Combat Commander also got a shiny new Redux, which is what you're looking at now, and that's also available on Steam right now. It's quite a history lesson for MOBA and arcade gaming fans alike.
So now we know what we're fighting. Monsters.
Not content with two landmark moments in the medium, Battlezone would have a third bite of the cherry in 2016 when PlayStation VR brought that tantalising tech we'd all been dreaming of for years into the regular gamer's living room. Battlezone VR wears its lineage on its sleeve with those highly stylised, Tron-like shapes and neon colours summoning the original arcade game. And oh look, there's the volcano too. Just as the cool kids of 1980 were doing, here you're smashing enemy tanks into smithereens, but now you're also doing it in the world, not just staring at the screen. As you look around, you can see the cockpit of your own tank, hands operating whatever these lever thingies are that you use to operate a futuristic sci-fi tank. This was a PSVR launch title, and it's so fitting that Battlezone VR stood at the starting line for virtual reality, just like the arcade game did for 3D graphics and the 90s titles did for crossing the streams of shooters and strategies. Battlezone Gold Edition is now available on Steam too, and you can play it whether you've got a VR headset or not. It's still an odyssey of retro futuristic particle effects and frenzied tank battles, whether you step inside it or invite it onto your screen.
Welcome to Battlezone.
Okay, we're gonna have to step outside of that DeLorean now. Cards on the table, it's not strictly mine. And besides, we've covered 4 decades of Battlezone's pioneering spirit now. Were you in the arcades when it first arrived? We'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments if so. Right, my day pass for the Rebellion Great Library is about to expire, so I'm out of here. Until next time, keep moving towards that volcano.
Good shooting, Cook. You saved my ass out there.